All right, guys. So here's the second part of our major issues of Civil War PowerPoint. Today, like I explained to you yesterday, it's going to be a little bit longer. We have about 6 slides, where yesterday we only had 3. But we only have 2 parts where we do question time. So let's dive into this. First, we're going to look at the impact of tariffs. Now, what I did for y'all is I split it into 3 sections. We're going to look at the impact of tariffs on the North, the South, and the West. The other main issue we're going to look at is slavery. And slavery, I'm also going to show you the impact of slavery on the North, South, and the West. Now, what's important here is that these are the 2 main issues that pushed or forced America to a civil war. Now, the impact of tariffs can also be described as states' rights, because the issues of tariffs, remember we're talking about states deciding if they want to keep it or not. The issue of tariffs go hand by hand with states' rights, because the southern states felt that they had the right to get rid of tariffs. Now, slavery is going to be an issue we're going to talk about later, and slavery is an issue which links which goes across and just really describes not only the economic system of the South, but a Southern culture, and we'll get to that in a second. But I digress. Let's talk about the impact of tariffs. So the North loved tariffs. The North was really awesome. I mean, they thought tariffs were the best thing in the world. Here's the reason why. Think about this. You're a business owner. You know, you got your top hat, monocle on. You look like a Monopoly guy, and you're sitting there and you're saying, I want to make some more money. I want to make sure that people buy my goods. But because I'm in America, it costs a lot to produce my stuff. What can I do? So what they decided was that they could create a tariff. And what a tariff is it's a tax on any goods that are shipped to your country. So let's say America made its cloth, like I have here at the bottom of the page, for $4 a roll. Right here, for $4 a roll, okay? Where in Britain made cloth that also cost $4 a roll. Now here's the problem. The South was having a lot of conflict with the North. And the South already had an extensive trade network with Britain, because the South would trade Britain its cotton, it would get money, and in exchange, it would buy the cloth from Britain. So what Americans did in the North trying to fix this problem is America put a 25% tariff, or I'm sorry guys, or what equals to about $1. And what happened was in the South, Southern Americans had 2 options. They can either buy the cloth from the North for $4, or they could buy the cloth from Britain for $5. Now, where does the extra dollar come from? Basically, it's a tax, all right? You see right here that they added a whole extra dollar, a dollar tax we put in. And this made the Southerners mad, because what they thought was that the North was trying to hurt their economy by forcing them to pay a tax. And that made the Southerners mad. The Southerners, on the other hand, were extremely opposed to this. They were mad because for most of them, they sent their cotton off to England and they got credit. It's kind of similar to this. Think about when you have video games, right? And you got these video games and you're trying to get some money back from it. So you take your video games to wherever, let's just say GameStop. So you go to GameStop and you're like, I'm here to sell my games. What will you give it for me? And of course, traditional GameStop, they're like, sure, I mean, you bought the game $40, I'll give you $1 for it. You know, typical ripoffs. But they say, I'll give you $1 cash for it, or I'll give you $5 in store credit. What are you going to take? Of course, you're going to take the store credit because you get $4 extra. That same thing that happened in the South. The South farmed for cotton, and what they would do is they would send all of their cotton off to England, to Britain, to Britain and to Europe, and they would get credit from English goods. So they would send off, like $1,000 worth of cotton, and they would get $1,000 worth of credit from England. Here's a bad thing though. That credit, you had to buy goods from England. So let's say they want to spend $1,000 on goods from England, right? But there's a tariff. They're not going to be able to spend all that money on England. They're going to spend they're going to buy maybe $800 worth of stuff from England because they have to pay $200 worth of tax or tariff. So basically, they're losing money because they have to sell their materials for lower price because they have to pay this tax. And that made them mad. And lastly, let's talk about the West. The West backed the North. Now, they had a lot of small farmers. And the reason why they backed the North is this. It was hard for them to get their crops to market. Think about like country bumpkins. Think just in your mind, what are hillbillies like? Hillbillies are way out in the country, bumbling around, maybe have like half suspenders on, just, hillbillies. It's the hillbillies have nice wagons, they have nice cars, they have really fancy stuff. No, they live way out in the country. And that's what the West was like. The West was farming all these crops, but they really had no way to get their stuff to market. So the West supported a tariff because what the tariffs did was it built roads and canals to the West. So with these new roads and canals, the West was able to more easily ship goods to the North. So they supported this to make themselves more money. All right, guys, it's our first question time. Now, the teacher's going to go over this question with you. I'm going to pause, and I'll get back to you in a second. All right, guys, we're back. I hope that was a really good discussion. Let's move on. The next section we're going to talk about is slavery. Now, slavery is really unique. There's a big debate in history, even today. Was slavery just an economic issue, or was slavery also a cultural and social issue? Let's dive in and see what this is all about. So the impact of slavery on the North. And by 1804, slavery has been outlawed in all states north of the Ohio River. And what the North did was the North was the first place that born abolitionists. And what abolitionists were they were trying to fight for liberation of slavery. And in fact, a lot of these people in the North were really, they criticized Southern culture. They're the first people that actually wrote about the Southerners not being as smart as Northerners, the Southerners not being as classy as Northerners, the Southerners being really underclassed. And the reason why they said this, they had slaves. They thought that the Southerners couldn't be educated. They couldn't be sophisticated because they have slaves. That just doesn't fly in a modern world. So the North looked at the South as less intelligent, less civilized than they were. So they started to attack the South on almost all issues. And to the North, slavery was an economics issue for the South, but it also was almost a cultural issue. They thought that the South had less culture because they had slaves. And because of that, they not only attacked them when it comes to slavery, they attacked it when it comes to economic issues, they attacked them when it came to political issues. The North attacked the South because they thought they didn't know what to do with themselves because they weren't as classy. And that all goes back to slavery, because slavery is an issue. They saw slavery as separate in the North and the South, and the North felt that they had the South's best interests in mind, and they're the only ones that can really rule the country because they're more sophisticated. Now, the Southerners had a different mentality about slavery. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. There was a mistake that happened on my PowerPoint. Let's get back to where we were. So we were talking about the impact of slavery on the South. So the South had a little bit different interpretation of slavery than the North. The Southern perspective of slavery was all about economics. The Southerners based their entire economy on slave labor because the economy was based on agriculture. They had cash crops. They had cotton, indigo, rice, tobacco. These are really difficult crops to grow. In fact, cotton isn't soft and fluffy. It actually has these little spikes that stick out from really sharp burrs that you have to pull the cotton from, and it's really painful labor. So what the Southerners saw was that their slaves weren't necessarily people. They considered them almost property. And it was property that we can have. There's kind of a connection we can make to today's life. When you think of someone who's rich today, you think of them having nice things. They have like a Lambo, a nice house, nice kicks, nice jackets, nice clothes. They got a lot of really nice products, really nice material things. The Southerners at the time saw slaves as almost like property, like machines. And the more slaves a person owned, the richer that person was. And that's what the problem the Southerners had at the time. They didn't make the connection that the slaves were people; they were humans. Their perspective of it was that they were products that they can use. Now, this is not all the South. I don't want to generalize. This is just the primary Southern landowners. There's a lot of people in the South who didn't support that, who realized that slaves were people and that thought slaves should be emancipated. But it would take after the Civil War to do this. And what the interesting thing about this is the Southern view of slavery was much cultural. They saw slaves as creating the Southern society. Slaves were the backbone of the labor. The rich people who had slaves had enough that they didn't have to work. They could chill at their homes and they could think about being a politician or being a general or being an intellectual because they had someone at home that was growing and farming the crops that was making money for them. Whereas the poor whites were called rednecks. And the reason why they were called rednecks was at the time, white people, when we burn the sun. So the poor whites, when they're working in the fields alongside the slaves, their head would be down all day farming up whatever it is, tobacco, cotton, whatever. And this is way before sunscreen. So like I said, white people, we catch on fire, we burn. And when we're farming, or when we were, I say we because my family did this, we were poor. When white people were out farming, they would end the day, they would go home and they would be pink like a lobster. And that's how you can tell who was rich and who was in the South. If you were really pale, you were rich because you didn't have to go out and farm. You could stay in the house. But if you were poor, you were called a redneck because your neck was always down farming and your neck turned red. All right, guys, let's go to our second question. Or I'm sorry, one more thing. I lied. We're going to talk about slavery in the West. Now, the West there's a lot of conflict. Remember yesterday we talked about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. There was both people from the North and people from the South living in the West. And because of that, we had pro-slave and anti-slave living right next door. And that actually caused warfare. In the Kansas-Nebraska territory, there was actually people fighting each other. Literally fighting each other with swords and guns about the issue of slavery. And the West had a small mini civil war before we even got to our big one. Now we're going to hit our last question time. So the teacher's going to pause your video and answer, or they're going to discuss a few questions with you. All right, guys, let's finish it up. So we're going to go to our independent practice. Yesterday you should have done the issue of slavery, but I'm not sure how many of y'all finished it. So I made sure to put this back on our screen. So today on independent practice, you're going to finish up your Learning with Graphic Organizers on page 249. Make sure on the sheet of notebook paper you add in the issue of slavery and the election of Abraham Lincoln. Once you're done, turn in your completed independent practice to Mr. Parkman or Ms. Satir. This will be our last lecture we have this week because tomorrow you're going to have a quiz in class and Mr. Parkman or Ms. Satir is going to go over that quiz review with you on your reflection for today. All right, so you have a good weekend. I'll see you tomorrow.